On the most isolated inhabited point on the planet, an island so remote the nearest land is over 2,000 kilometers away, stand nearly 1,000 stone statues. Some weigh 80 tons. Some are 10 meters tall. And the people who carved and moved them for kilometers had no wheel, no metal, no pack animals, and, apparently, not even enough wood in the end. How? And why did they nearly die doing it? This is the Mystery Archive, the Moai of Easter Island. Rapa Nui, the navel of the world. Today I tell you what science discovered about the statues that walked, the collapse that became a global legend, and the recent twist rewriting everything you learned about this case. Open the file with me. First, the stage. Rapa Nui is a triangle of volcanic rock in the South Pacific, settled by Polynesian navigators who arrived in canoes, probably around the year 1200, guided only by stars, currents, and birds. Alone, in the void, they built one of the strangest and most impressive civilizations in human history. And its product is the Moai. They aren't generic idols, they're portraits. Representations of the ancestors, the dead chiefs of each clan, carved to stand with their backs to the sea and their faces to the village, protecting the living, channeling the ancestors' spiritual power, the mana, into the land and the community. Each Moai was a stone grandfather watching over the grandchildren. Almost all were carved in a single place, the quarry of the Reno Raraku volcano. And that's where the first chilling image is. Hundreds of Moai still stand in the quarry, in every stage. Some just sketched in the rock. Some nearly finished, lying down. And dozens standing, buried up to the neck by time. Those famous heads of Easter Island are actually whole statues, with bodies and all, buried by centuries of sediment. The quarry is a construction site that stopped mid-work. All at once. But before the end, the peak, and the great engineering mystery, how do you move a statue of dozens of tons up to 18 kilometers, from the quarry to the platforms on the coast? For centuries, the explanation was tragic. They supposedly cut down all the palm trees on the island to make rollers and sledges, dragging the Moai lying down. And by deforesting everything, they caused their own ecological collapse. That's the version that became a global parable about environmental destruction. Except the people of Rapa Nui always told another story. Their oral tradition says a phrase scientists ignored for decades as folklore: the Moai walked to their places. Walked. And in 2012, a group of archaeologists decided to take the legend seriously and test it. They made a concrete replica of a 5-ton Moai, with the exact shape of the originals, belly forward, with a rounded, tilted base. They tied 3 ropes, one on each side and one behind. And with just 18 people, rocking the statue side to side and pulling, they made the 5-ton Moai walk. Upright. Waddling down the road, exactly like a refrigerator you walk across a kitchen corner by corner. It worked so well they moved the replica hundreds of meters in minutes. And then it all clicked. The wrong shape, pot-bellied and tilted, of the Moai that were on the way to the platforms wasn't a carving error. It was a transport design. They carved the statue to walk, and only gave it the final finish, standing it straight and dignified, when it reached its destination. The island's ancient roads, in fact, are slightly concave, like a rail to guide the waddling statues. The legend was right all along. The Moai walked. This knocks down half the tragedy. If they didn't need to fell the whole forest for rollers, the collapse wasn't a simple ecological suicide over statues. And here comes the second recent twist, even more important. The newest research questions whether there was a catastrophic collapse at all before the Europeans arrived. The old story said, the Rapa Nui destroyed their environment, went to war, turned to cannibalism and fell apart on their own. But recent dating and population studies suggest otherwise, that the society was more stable and ingenious than thought, that they managed the soil with clever techniques like rock gardens that protected plants from wind and drought, and that the population didn't crash until the real disaster, the arrival of Europeans in the 18th century, bringing disease, and worse, the slave ships of the 19th century that enslaved and took away much of the population. The collapse the legend blames on the Rapa Nui themselves may have been, in large part, imported genocide. And the island still holds an enigma no one has cracked, the Rongorongo. A writing system of its own, carved on wooden tablets, with symbols of figures, animals and shapes, the only writing system invented in all of Oceania. And no one in the world can read it. The few who knew were precisely those taken by the slave ships. The island invented writing, and its meaning was kidnapped along with its people. There's also the mystery of the Pukeo, the red stone hats many Moai wear, some weighing several tons on their own. How did they place a multi-ton block on top of an already raised 10-meter statue? The current hypothesis, ramps and the same rocking with ropes principle. Every answer science finds reveals a new level of ingenuity we had underestimated. The scoreboard of facts. Confirmed, nearly 1,000 Moai, carved in Reino Raraku between the 13th and 15th centuries, their portraits of ancestors. They were moved upright, walking with ropes, exactly as oral tradition always said and the experiment proved. The heads are whole buried statues. There's a native writing, Rongorongo, still undeciphered, and the biggest population crash coincides with European arrival and violence. Still open, why Moai production stopped so suddenly, leaving hundreds in the quarry. Exactly how much the environment degraded by human hand versus natural causes. And, of course, the Rongorongo. While no one reads those tablets, the island itself keeps its own version of the story, written and locked. My verdict for this file: Easter Island was a victim twice. First of isolation, which forced it into a lonely genius. Then of the legend, which for decades turned it into a fairy tale about a stupid people who destroyed themselves, when the data says almost the opposite, a brilliant people, who made statues walk, and who were largely destroyed by outside hands. The Moai aren't the monument of a failure. They're the monument of an ingenuity the world preferred not to understand. It's worth pausing on the quarry of Reino Raraku, because the unfinished Moai there are gigantic. The largest of them, nicknamed El Gigante, is nearly 21 meters tall and estimated at over 150 tons, lying down, still attached to the rock, never finished. It could never have been moved by the walking technique. It's as if, in the end, the carvers were competing to make the biggest ancestor, an arms race that may have outrun even their own engineering. Then there are the eyes. For a long time the Moai were thought to be blind, with those empty sockets. Until, in 1978, an archaeologist found fragments of eyes made of white coral and dark obsidian. When a Moai was finally raised on its platform and given its coral eyes, it was believed to wake up, and the mana, the ancestors' power, began to flow. The Moai in the quarry, eyeless, were still sleeping. They only came to life when they reached home. Another point science adjusted: many Moai around the island were found knocked down, fallen face first. For a long time this was read as proof of the collapse wars, with rival clans toppling each other's ancestors. But some of those falls may have come from earthquakes, tsunamis, and simple abandonment, and several of the Moai you see standing in photos today were actually erased by archaeologists in the 20th century. The classic image of Easter Island is, in part, a modern restoration. And the platforms they stand on, the ahu, are an engineering feat of their own, walls of fitted stone with a precision that, in places, recalls the Inca stonework of the mainland, stones cut to lock without mortar. Some researchers see in this a hint of contact or shared knowledge across the Pacific. Others say it's convergent ingenuity, invented right there. One more open thread in this tangle. There's also the question that dwarfs the rest: how did such a small population, on such a tiny island, organize the labor for 1,000 statues? Estimates suggest moving and raising a single large Moai took a significant chunk of the island's people, coordinated for days. This wasn't idle art. It was the central organizing project of an entire society, the thing that gave their world meaning and structure, right up until it suddenly stopped. And the sudden stop is the haunting part. The tools were left in the quarry. Statues sit half-carved, as if the workers put down their picks one afternoon and never came back. Whatever happened, contact, disease, a shift in belief, a loss of faith in the ancestors themselves, it ended a tradition that had defined Rapa Nui for centuries, in what looks, archaeologically, like the blink of an eye. And you? Did you know the statues walked upright? And what do you think is written on the Rongorongo tablets? Leave it in the comments, and if you're good at cracking code, that's your Everest. Subscribe and hit the bell, a new mystery every day, and a full file every week. The archive never really closes.